Welcome to the WiLD conversation. This is such a great topic. So I have a question I want to open this up with regarding margin. And the question is this: are you in a season where you need more margin, or in a season where you need to let go of your focus on it? Are you in a season where you need more margin, or in a season where you need to let go of your focus on it? So first of all, I have an admission. I got a confession to make. My family calls me Practical Patty, and it's annoying as all get out. My two sons and my wife think it's really funny because it is so irritating. And one of the reasons I think it's basically that I don't like, if I were to go for a walk with my sons when they were little. This may make me sound like a horrible person, but when my sons would take risks, like unnecessary risks of running along a rock wall, I was actually less concerned about them skinning their knee and more concerned about the reality that we were 5 miles away from home and they're going to screw up this nice day that we were having together. Now, I'm not saying that makes me sound like a horrible person, because, if they get hurt really badly, that's a different situation. But a lot of times I'm like, really, did you have to take that risk? Because now you kind of messed up the day for everybody. I say all that because I have to admit, here's my confession, I'm a little bit obsessive about margin. And I think some of the WiLD Leaders team members who are here would nod their heads and they know what I'm talking about. And so part of I think the name Practical Patty, I don't know if my family would buy this or not, is my obsession with margin. And this necessity for thinking ahead about having space having enough space to contain life and to contain what we're doing and to continue to do what we're doing. So out of the gate, so here's a definition of margin. And this is why it's also annoying being one of my sons. I don't have daughters. So for my two sons, last night, my one son is back from college and he and his girlfriend are over at the house. And I'm like, and they're going to be business majors. So what is margin? And so it's like a test question. So I'm like, do you know? You're business students. You should know this. The definition of margin is the difference between the gross return on something and the gross cost of doing something. Are you with me? You can define it different kinds of ways. It's basically about the difference between the cost, the investment that's going to take, and the benefit that we get. And the distance between those things is margin. All right. And in margin, in essence, is the net. It's the free space. I know, Tim, you're loving it. It's the free space over the costs. All right. I also love the concepts of margins in books, right? It's this free space to write on. It gives us this space that we can make notes in the margins. So here's another piece of this that's kind of interesting. So what are the different types of margin, the different types of currency that are driving margin? And here's some of the things to think about. The currency that is whatever's being exchanged in that cost versus the benefit. One is obviously finances or time or money. Okay, money is an obvious one. Time is probably another obvious currency. Workload, right? That marginal space and workload, or even emotional margin, if we want to go a little bit deeper in that way. And so I am also inviting you into the possibility that margin is both a very personal conversation and a very practical conversation, because I think it's a necessity for us to understand this in our organizations. But it's also a necessity for us to understand it probably personally. So here's some things about margin. Margin increases the amount of free or blank space alongside the working pieces and costs of them. All right, so it increases that amount of free space. Now we can think about all the things that free space might create, or it opens up. Here's another one. Without wisdom regarding margins, organizations and teams either die a quick or slow death, okay, without margins, or they get lazy because of external funding. So I can't tell you how many nonprofit organizations that I have run into who are just funded forever. It's just, they have massive amounts of cash. And if you talk to people who will tell you the real story, oftentimes the tension that they ride is a lack of urgency. Does that make sense? We have a lack of urgency because of the amount we have so much margin. Margin provides room to choose, to experiment, to be present, to make decisions. So margin, when we have that increasing gap, we're getting more out of it than we are that it's costing us to include. We have room to choose, to experiment, to be present, and to make decisions. That's really fascinating. My brain's kind of going down a path right now around agency. Like maybe a little bit of margin increases agency is a fascinating thing, Dr. Halleck. Think about that for a second. Margin is the net or extra in economies of whatever we're talking about. It kind of got me thinking about economics and, the fundamentals of economics. I go back to my, one of my favorite economics professors that's about supply and demand. Kind of interesting to think about. If it's true, listen to this. This is kind of fascinating. If it's true that without vision, the people will perish, maybe without margin, the people will run too hot and burn out. Kind of interesting to think about, right? Without vision, if they perish, without margin, they may run too hot and burn out. I would say also this, I want to be careful about this because it also causes you to think about that margin isn't the only thing. That some of us, I think, may actually obsess about margin to the point that we need to let it go. But it certainly, I think, is something that's important. But I think here's why. Understanding margin is an integral part of a leader's job because it provides the provision of free space to see others, to innovate, and to become our best selves. And here's what's also interesting. Too little margin and we become selfish, putting urgency above sacrifice, and too much and we risk becoming entitled. And I think for that reason, we have to seek and structure for it, but not be defined by it. I think it's okay to seek it and structure for it, but not be defined by it. So I come back to my question. Are you in a season where you need more margin or in a season where you need to let go of it, your focus on it? Here's some things like what happens when we run too close to the margins. So at one point, some of you are familiar with the WiLD toolkit, our system for whole leader development. I spent a couple of years in a massive contract with a corporation that's a global corporation that wanted to build and white label the WiLD toolkit for their corporation. It was a 2-year project, massive budget. And because of the contracting that I did with it, which wasn't bad in the beginning, but because of all that occurred and the number of people who were involved in this European corporation, I lost all margin. It was just it was in the end we actually lost money. It should have, if you looked at the amount of revenue we brought in, we should have made money, but there were a whole variety of reasons. So how does margin disappear? Here's one thing: too many people get involved. So one of the things that happened in that project is every call we would get on, there would be a dozen vice presidents on the call making adjustments to what we were doing. So margin went away that way. Our purpose isn't clear. When we don't know why we're doing something, we start to do everything. Our lack of clear contracting. I mean, both actual contracting and psychologically contracting, thinking about being clear about what we are going to agree to with one another is so critical. Project life, number 4, project life or mission creep. You know what I'm talking about? If you've ever been a consultant, you know what scope creep looks like, but we have like spiritual creep that happens, right? We have all kinds of different, where it's sort of things become, or mission creep, where it becomes overwhelming. So it's not just financial creep. And I think another thing is this, pressure for growth as the purpose and not calling as the purpose. So where growth becomes, or profit, or net gain and profit becomes a focus, as opposed to a deeper conversation, well, why we're here in the first place, is so key. And then lastly, I'll say this, number 6 was this: a lack of differentiation and a pleaser attitude over a purpose attitude. Like one of the places where margin disappears in friendships all the time is trying to make everybody happy. You know what I mean? So we lack that sort of clarity in conversations and speaking love and truth to people and working hard at that. And so I think margin's not everything, but I think it's something that we have to watch. Now, here's some of the problems some of the problems with margin. One of the things is that managers, in my experience, let's go down the managerial path, are not taught to think about margin. Most managers in large corporations that are all about the profitability is a necessity don't have financial accountability, so they actually haven't learned much about margin in the process. But they're taught to think about causes, systems, or projects. And most don't have that marginal authority sometimes to do anything about it. Here's another problem. We get marginally lazy in economic systems or organizations where the margins are so large. And the thing is this, like our causes that are so critical are not served without margin. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a very large corporation that you all know down the street that has a very weird name that has multiple colors in their logo, that some of you know what I'm talking about. Like it's right down the street. They're building massive structures and buildings right now. I'm sitting there looking like no one's going to fill this. Can you imagine the margins that are allowing them to still build massive buildings that no one will office in? So margin, it allows for those kinds of things, but it also can cause us to sort of there was something that was said in one organizations where, I worked with years ago. I'll move on. Margin managers are typically pressured or driven by short-term results and shiny objects. And thinking on the margin requires a future perspective, thinking about things to come. Marginal thinking is usually considered financial when in fact it's the difference between the cost of one thing and the return. So long-term marginal thinking is about creating mid to long-term sustainability and growth in a world where we want big returns now. So okay, Rob, that's a lot of thinking. I did write, I'm not going to go into this, but some of you are going to be like, I want you to talk about this. I wrote down, noble margin is created on purpose. I don't know if there is such a thing as noble margin, but I think it's interesting to think about, right? So what are the strategies? I'm going to give you 7 things very quickly. 1, specificity of organizational vision and mission and personal calling and purpose. The conversation we're having right after this is about your calling and purpose. Stay on if you want to increase margin by getting focused on why you're here and thinking more deeply about that. If you don't know your purpose and your organization's purpose, it's almost impossible to drive toward margin and to know when to sacrifice margin on purpose. Number 2, repeatability and scalability. Grow with what if you could grow with decreasing effort? What if you thought about what it would mean to grow with decreasing effort? This is a horrible thing. Megan, I'm going to use you as an example. When I first started working with Megan, I think I told her this. I said, Megan, I want you to do your job as if you're going to get hit by a train tomorrow. And what I meant was for her to do her job in a way that someone else could pick it up. Because if she does that, then it increases margin, right? It increases our capacity to grow well together. And actually, we don't want that to happen to Megan. So it'll actually help Megan for all the time she's in that role. Number 3, that second one was repeatability and scalability. It's thinking about, can we create processes that repeat, and can we create processes that scale, that actually decrease effort as we grow? Number 3, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or as my friend who owned birds says, feed 2 birds with 1 scone. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. So this is she said, you need to adjust that saying. But what I mean by that is when we're creating projects, is what if we thought about this right out of the gate? And this is what the WiLD team does, is how could we solve 3 to 4 to 5 problems with this one thing? Another way to do that. I'll say this also is creating value pull. So much of our focus is on push, and push is exhausting. So what if we thought about, when we create value pull, it's like thinking about what you do that's valuable, that's rare, and that's difficult to imitate. What do you do that's valuable, that's rare, and difficult to imitate? And those are not my 3 ideas, by the way. That's written by some other smart people. But that's a value proposition. And when you figure out your value proposition, it increases margin. I don't care whether you're in a nonprofit or a business, like that can be powerful. And then this is my last thing, and then let's go, Dr. Halleck. My last thing is this. I'm going to say it like this. Look for providential margin. And that's my way of saying that sometimes margin appears miraculously. You look at your portfolio and you say, I have no idea why it's growing when I'm giving, but it's growing as I'm giving. And so I think that's one of the things to think about. Sometimes it comes not because of something we did, but some kind of miracle happens. So let's go get wiser.